Good evening, everyone. My name is Sydney Yeager, and I'm the Public Programs Coordinator at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. And I'm so pleased to welcome you to this evening's program, Story Survive, Sergeant Salvatore Distefano. Here at the museum, we are dedicated to the crucial mission of educating, our diverse community about Jewish life and heritage before, during, and after the Holocaust. As part of that mission, our programs illuminate the stories of survivors, broader histories of hate and anti-Semitism, stories of resistance against injustice, and more. Thank you so much for joining us today virtually. We hope if you are able to, that you will visit the museum in person to see our core exhibition, The Holocaust, What Hate Can Do, which holds several artifacts that you're going to see this evening. And also our temporary exhibition, Survivors, Faces of Life After the Holocaust, from photographer Martin Scholler. You can learn more and find tickets on our website. We also appreciate the vital support of our members so much here at the museum. If you want to get closer to the museum and enjoy exclusive programs, member previews to exhibitions, and free admission, you can explore museum membership on our website or email membership@mjhnyc.org to learn more. Closed captions are available on today's program, and instructions on how to turn the captions on or off will be posted in the chat, in addition to all the links I've mentioned. If you have questions for our speakers during the program, please put them in the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the hour. Today, we are so honored to be joined by Dan Distefano, Paul Distefano, and Nina Picone, who are the children of Sergeant Distefano. Thank you so much for joining us today. And now I'm going to pass things over to Dan, Nina, and Paul.
Hi, I'm Dan, and I'm happy to do this tonight. I want to give a shout out to my brother who wasn't able to be with us tonight, Tom, but he's as much as part of us as we all are. Starting with this picture, I wanted you to see the immigrant family that my father came from. We want to let you know who he is. And so from Sicily, straight from Sicily, are my grandparents on the left. And that's my father's sister, our aunt, Josephine, on the right, obviously later in her life. And so they came into Hudson County and lived in West New York and worked in Union City in West New York, and had the immigrant experience, with my father and my aunt being the first generation born here. Okay, next shot. This is Dad when he's very
that's his
young.
communion.
That's his communion, yeah. And communion. Yeah, so very much a part of the immigrant life for us. And, that's how innocent he looked in his little short pants and his very neat suit. It's very nice. And that's a good contrast to what comes next. So the next picture, please. This is him probably around graduation from high school.
Yeah.
Obviously all grown up and, ready to take on college and the world, which was not a usual thing. He would have been the first person in our family to get a college degree. My aunt was pulled out of high school so she could go to work and help pay for his college. So what's odd, or again, the contrast, is that a couple of short years later, he had no idea he would be going to war. And that brings us to the next picture. And there he is in his uniform with his sergeant stripes. And, well, no, he's not a sergeant there yet, I don't think. But there's his marksman.
I was going to say he only completed one semester in college. He was finishing up his first semester in college at Columbia when they bombed Pearl Harbor. So that kind of puts things into perspective. So he only actually made it through one semester prior to World War II.
And what was this semester in? Do you remember, Dean?
I'm sorry?
Do you remember what the semester was in, what he studied?
Well, he originally was looking to major in medicine. He wanted to be a doctor.
Okay.
Kind of changed after the war, but which we'll get to. But yes, originally he was going to school for medicine.
Well, and
To,
that brings us to the next. I'm sorry, Paul, go on.
I said to our surprise that, you know, as we were growing up, we found out, because I always wondered how, when he was in the army, how he ended up as a medic in the army. And when I
Mhm.
found out that he was going to school for medicine when the war broke out, that put the puzzle together for me.
Yeah,
Also,
I was I had a weird view of it, but um, Neen?
yeah,
Oh.
when he went into after boot camp, they did testing, and to test where they felt that their skills
Mhm.
were. And after he was tested, they directed him towards the medical corps and sent him up to Northeastern University to be trained for further training.
Mm-hmm. And that brings us to the next picture, which puts him in surgery.
Mhm.
That is he on the left. And oddly enough, going through a couple of these pictures that were taken of surgery, it was easy to spot him right off the bat. I guess your parents, right?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
that's him in surgery helping out. He wasn't a surgeon, he assisted in surgery, but he certainly did a lot of it. So the next couple of pictures are of him during the war. His unit actually put together a book of their experiences, and it was called Buchenwald and Beyond, the 120th Evac unit. And he was on the photography committee, apparently, because there are a number of pictures of him in the book. And when you go to the end of the book, there are something like 6 pages of people in small print who were in this unit. And the fact that he wound up in 5 or 6 pictures started to make me look into it and say, like, oh, he was on the photography committee. Of course, that's how he got so many pictures in there.
Yeah.
So this is one of them. We can go to the next shot. They, in the book, the end papers are kind of like an Indiana Jones movie where they're flying over a map. They actually mapped their route so that you could see it. There is another a page that can before this, but I thought this one was just more graphic and easy to see, so that you could see where they stopped and where they went and where they traveled. And it's really quite an excellent book. And the picture of the front of that book is next. So, well, you guys probably want to talk more about this too. We knew this book existed, and we were shown it once when we were growing up, and it contains pictures like what you just saw, but it also contains pictures of the Holocaust, the worst parts of the Holocaust. And there is a famous lampshade that was made of human skin by a commandant's wife, and they kind of showed us that and then snapped the book shut and put it away. And so that's my memory of it. I just
Yeah,
knew it
that's my
existed, but
memory.
it was hidden after that.
I again, same thing. I knew it was there,
Mhm.
but we
Mhm.
never were allowed to look at it. Mom, I think it was mom, really, mom especially always said, it's just too upsetting. You don't want to see that, so.
Yeah, that does feed into parts of the story later, which I'll hook into.
And-
So
and
that's
I
the
know,
original book, which the museum owns now.
Yes.
Paul?
I just wanted to say, you saw it as kids, but I never saw it. The first time I laid eyes on it was after Dad's passing and after Mom's passing.
I think you were just too young.
Yeah,
Honestly,
'cause-
I think they just, yeah.
right.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I think the
They
only
don't want-
reason I saw it was some, I forget where it was, but mom was going through something and came across it one day, and she kind of quickly showed it to me, but then put it away, you know, so I think, I don't think she like planned on showing it to me. It's just that it was there. And I think, like you say, you were a little bit younger than us, and so I think you were just that much younger. She didn't want you to see, you know, you wouldn't have seen it.
Right.
Yeah, the pictures that are in it are actually not from Buchenwald, they're from Auschwitz. And it wasn't until, because my dad had a copy of all of those horror pictures that he had gotten from a friend, because you could buy copies of them at that time, which of course I didn't know, but our curator Maggie knew. And she identified them as being from Auschwitz, and they're in the book. And of course, they're enough to scare any child. Um, they own the book now, the museum, and there was one copy in the Holocaust Museum in Washington. But to see it, you had to be working on a project and, you know, register with them, and then you could only see it there. So we were happy that there's another copy there. When this stuff all came to light, I realized it should be in a museum, and I started to make copies. So we all have exact copies of this book and of some of the things later that you'll be seeing. Okay, the next frame. We believe that's Dad. I'm not sure now. But they were a semi-mobile army hospital, as you can see in the bottom underneath where it says hospital, which is, I guess, why they were able to carry around a big sign like that that said who they were. With, you know, I mean, a real mobile hospital wouldn't have bothered to carry that around, I don't believe. But they were
Dad told me
semi-mobile.
that it took more than one. They were mobile, but it wasn't, they weren't like MASH on TV where they could just pick up everything and go. They were semi-mobile, so it took more than one move to get everything from one place to another.
The next three pictures were a surprise to discover, but we love them, and because he looks so great in them. But these are all in camp. There he is with the sergeant stripes now. And the next picture is means that he was reading too many movie magazines, you know, where people pose and try to look cool. And you know, so there are a couple of those, but he does look cool, so we're happy about that.
Yeah.
And the next one is a little bit of a mystery. The guy next to him, he must have been best friends, because they're in a lot of pictures. And I think he was a doctor. His last name is Hontas, Hontas. We don't know what the sign says. It's hard to even, I guess, even if you read German, it's hard to see all the letters. But obviously they held it for a reason, like we'd conquered something. The next sign is, let's go to the next picture. This is from Buchenwald, and it's interesting because look how well carved it is and how beautifully carved it is. And I'm guessing it might be the tool, you know, like the workshop, tool garden in Buchenwald, and it's really a work of art to a very horrible place. And we don't know who that soldier is. That's not my dad. Okay, next picture. This is in the exhibit in the museum. Our dad is the guy in the middle on the top who took his helmet off so he could be identified. And they're all wearing German helmets that they apparently confiscated or found after the Germans fled. I would think that would make sense, because if you're trying to run away and you've got a German helmet on, that would pretty much identify you as a German soldier, and we're going to get you. So
Yeah.
they left all those, and he didn't come home with one, but obviously he had one. Wenderpunk equals turning point. Okay, thank you, Anne Marie. You'll have to tell us what the rest of it says later. She's always so helpful. Okay, I can't do. All right, the next picture. Again, Keith, this is in the book. Dad was good at sports. And in two places in the book, it actually mentions that he was, you know, a winning player for his team. Baseball was the other sport that they did. So here's him at basketball. And the next shot is after the war. He went, he took advantage of everything that the GI Bill gave. And that's him with his father, graduating from, where was it, Neen?
Stevens.
Stevens
Where?
Institute of
Stevens
Technology.
Institute of Technology, right? And
Yeah,
that's where we get into the this is how I rationalized him being in surgery. I figured he went into the military, and since he had an engineering degree, they figured, well, he must know something about the way systems work. Well, we'll put him in surgery, but that actually wasn't the case. So, all right, the next picture.
Well, I'm just gonna
Yeah.
say, we were
Mm.
never sure whether he just had a little bit too much of medicine when he was in the army and decided that maybe he didn't really want to do that after all, or whether
Mhm.
having lost those years to the army, to World War II, that he decided it was quicker to go to be an engineer. And so, you know, switched his major and went to Stevens Institute instead. So we were never really sure about that, but you know, it's one of those things that we ponder.
Because he never talked about it.
No,
Exactly.
never talked
Now,
about it.
okay, so now he's starting to get his life together. He's got a degree, he gets a job, and in the next picture, he meets this lovely young woman who is our mother, sitting there just looking all preppy. Uh,
Yeah.
and they start dating, and there's another picture of her, the next picture, which is just pretty cool. I'm sure my dad must have uh, set up these shots, because, you know, nobody takes a picture like that off the cuff. It looks great, and you know, we're happy to have them. Those are artifacts that came to light later. We never saw these growing up. Our parents would never take out the old pictures, and we still don't know why. We asked a number of times, "Oh, do you have old pictures we can look at?" And they said, "No, no, they're buried. We don't have time, et cetera, et cetera." So there are many more of my mom like this. She was a very beautiful woman, and the next picture you'll see is when then they decided to get married. And the dress had a 3-foot long train, I know that. And Neen, do you want to talk more about the dress?
Oh, well, it's a beautiful dress. I actually wore the same dress when I got married. I wore my mom's gown.
Mm-hmm.
It did have a huge train. The woman that the story that my mother told me is that the woman, you know, my mother didn't plan on such a long train, but the story after after she made friends with the seamstress that made the dress for her, the woman liked her so much she added extra yardage to her train. So my mother had a very,
Mm-hmm.
very long train. And
Right.
yeah, and back in her day, they used to have to carry it over their arm. When I wore it, we actually found, we had a friend who was a seamstress, and she actually was able to bustle the gown for me, so I could put it up when we were at our reception. But it was just a beautiful gown, and I wore the same headpiece also. I just had to replace the veil because the veil had torn.
Ah, okay. Yes. There was a question. There will be more talk of the wartime. We just wanted you to kind of quickly go through and see the life he had after the war, but then we'll get deeply into the artifacts and the war. So let's move ahead now.
Yeah.
This is them getting married, and then of course they went on a lovely honeymoon in Bermuda. That's mom, and the next one is just too cute for words. Them in Bermuda on their honeymoon cuddling. The next one now, of course, after the wedding, eventually comes a son, and here's Rootin' Tootin' Tommy.
Yeah.
probably on a birthday. So he was the firstborn, and then they decide to have another child, the next one, please, and they get 2 for 1, and that's my sister and I.
Yeah, lo and behold.
So, yeah, surprise. And
Yes.
then even after having us, we must have been just so wonderful that they decided to have a 4th, and that's the next picture. That's Paul. So in the house in Ridgefield Park. After that, moving along, we're just too cute for words. A little, buffed up family, ready for the holidays. Of course, next picture, please. There's a nice Christmas. Paul looks especially happy in that little rocking chair. And of course, someone's got to support all that. So the next picture is Dad at work, which is, that's the only picture I've ever seen of him at work, but he obviously supported us all. The next picture is the craziness that, happens in a home. Dad and Nina. And after the children came the dogs next. A dog the size of 3 children, but very gentle. And then there were more dogs, which is the next picture. And then you can go to the next picture with the dog. Things are, it's a lovely life. Next picture, even more dogs. There's another dog on his lap. And then, of course, all this while we're growing into teenagers, and maybe that got to be too much for Dad. Next picture, please, because he's thinking about strangling my sister. So, next picture, Mom and Dad aging, and they're retired, aging, shopping, having a good time. Next picture. That's Dad and actually sitting where I'm sitting. And in his late 80s. And of course, eventually his body just gives way, and the last picture of him is waving goodbye. That's him. Now we need to go into the story of the artifacts. And so Dad was over in Buchenwald, and he grabbed some artifacts while he was over there and saved some memories, but he would never talk about them because he knew he just couldn't. And they bought, when they got married, they bought a whole suite of furniture for their bedroom. And one of them, the next picture, please, happened to have underneath this second row of drawers, like a 4 to 6 inch well that was just empty. And whether it was meant to be a hiding place or not, it turned out to be like a secret compartment, because who would think to look underneath the second row of drawers. And so that's where he bundled up and hid the stuff that he brought back neatly in plastic so that it would survive. My mom, after my dad died, she went downhill, and she wound up in a care facility, and they wanted some paperwork. I was looking for it. It wasn't where it should have been. I called her up and said, "Do you know where your living will is?" And she says, "Well, check the secret compartment in the dresser." I said, "What are you talking about, secret compartment in the dresser?" She goes, "Yeah, the secret compartment. Everybody knows about it." It's like, well, I don't. So I opened it. I didn't find what I was looking for, but I found the packet of artifacts that my dad left, and never touched again. So next picture, please. You can see that's about where I found it. It was just tucked in there. That's a little deeper than it looks. Let me see what's the next picture. Okay, so Mom's in assisted living. She hasn't been in the house in a while. She came back once wanted to see the map of Buchenwald that was in the artifacts. And so then she had it in her possession and started moving it around. She's still in assisted living. There's a water break on the second floor. $60,000 of water damage happened to the house. I asked her where the artifacts were. She said, I don't remember. So not only are we hauling out, tons of stuff from the house that have been ruined, I don't know where they are, whether we're throwing them away or what. Finally, on the day before construction was about to start, next picture, please. I found them in this garbage bag on the floor in a bedroom. And that was, truly at the 11th hour. Let me see. So we all get together and I contacted the Jewish Museum, and Maggie Rad was nice enough to respond and say, yes, we're interested in the artifacts. And that brings us to the next picture. That's us. Everything's packed up in that suitcase. And so we all trooped over there to donate. The next picture is that's actually my copy of the map, but you'll see the original map as well. I did 30 scans of that map so that we could all have a copy of it and then stitched them together. Anyway, the map is important because the camp is gone, except for one building in the front. And it is not only hand numbered, hand lettered, hand colored. It's been updated where there are things pasted on over other things and added in later. You can tell there's a coffee stain on it and ink stains. And so this was the working map of the museum, and it was folded up, to the size of like a letter, and, put into the hiding place. That along with the book, the Buchenwald book, all the photos of Auschwitz, the horrible photos of Auschwitz, and all the photos of my dad. So, there are many more that you didn't see, but these were all donated. You can keep going with the pictures. So there's the original map. You can tell because it's frayed at the bottom, and you can see how bright the colors are there. Those are all hand colored in, which I thought was amazing. Okay, now the next one is important because it really kicked off this whole thing. In the top right of the map, my father wrote T4 Distefano Liberator. And when I saw that as I was sitting on their bed in their bedroom, I realized that's how he wanted to be remembered. And that's what kicked off the, let's contact museums and see if they're interested. So that to me is the most important part of the map. Next picture. Three. This is just pictures of us going through the process, of course, in the middle of the pandemic. All right.
Donation, yeah.
Yeah. And next picture, that's my niece. I'm sorry, Kara, on the left there. There's the three of us all, and, the book is on the table next to my sister's hand, actually. And the next one is, large picture of the map and how extensive it was. All that's left now is just in the front bottom. There's one building left. Eventually, the camp was used to house war criminals, Nazi war criminals, and in 1955 it was ripped down, except for the front building. Next picture. In those days, Time magazine was making editions just for the military. So if you look in the bottom right, it says Pony Edition. And at one point, people from governments all over the world toured Buchenwald and there's an article in this magazine that my dad signed. It's from April 1945. But it's all about the tour of Buchenwald and what they saw and how horrible it was. Neen, maybe you want to talk about the fact that they made the townspeople tour the
Yeah,
complex.
I mean, well, there's my father for years and years and years did not talk about his experiences there. In fact, I was already married and had children before I even knew that he had been at Buchenwald. He just didn't talk about it. And from what I hear, that's not an uncommon thing for people that, you know, that generation. They came home and put it away. But years later, I was watching a show called War and Remembrance with my dad, and they had some very graphic scenes of the concentration camps and the gas chambers, and and my dad got very emotional about it and just said like, oh my God, that's exactly what it was like. That's what they did. Like, and he started telling me about it. And this was the first time I had ever heard about him being there, you know, and it was really, it was amazing to me. And over the years, he would tell you other little bits and pieces. And one of the other things he told us was how after all of this happened, I believe it was General Patton ordered that they round up all the people in the area that lived within a certain mile radius, and they had to walk through the camp. And there's actually video of that at the museum, right by the display of his artifacts. But my father said, you know, all these people were walking through and they just kept saying the same thing. This wasn't us. We didn't do this. This wasn't this. We didn't do this. And he said they just wouldn't believe. They believed that they brought that, you know, the Americans brought that there and put it there so that they would look bad. And, you know, he said he couldn't believe it. You know, it's just, you know, over the years, he would give you little pieces. Like he would tell me, you know, that you'd walk in there and your first thing, you couldn't believe what you were seeing. He said your eyes were seeing it, but your brain just couldn't comprehend what it was that you were actually seeing. That, you know, it was almost like it shut it off because it was too out of the realm of anything that they had experienced in their lives to really put it into any kind of context. And it was, you know, you could see, and as you know, and as he got older, I think he opened up more and more about it a little bit, but it was always a little bit here, a little bit there. He would tell this person one little bit and this person another little bit. Another time, you know, we said something about there being Holocaust deniers, and he talked about the fact that, you know, just let me talk to them. I'll tell them, you know, like he could see he was emotional about it because I think
Angry.
angry. It became very real to him, you know, and I think as he got older, you know, when he was young, he was able to just like symbolically put it in a drawer and forget about it. But as he got older and more of that generation was gone, I think he realized that he had to tell some of it to somebody, or it would all have been for nothing. Like this story needed to be told.
And he did leave plenty of stuff, obviously, for us to put the pieces together. But I had said to him once, and my dad was, you know, a nice guy. And I said, gee, Dad, we've never talked about World War II. We need to sit down and do that at one point. And he just looked at me with a dead stare and said, no, we don't. And that was that, you know, how it is with their parent when you know their tone.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, when the movie Saving Private Ryan came out, he must have heard how good it was. And the first 20 minutes, if you haven't seen it, are brutal. And so he asked me if I thought he should see it. And I said, no, you can't see it. You can't. and he listened. He didn't go to see it. So I guess by that time it was pretty much common knowledge in the family, like he's not going to talk about that. He shouldn't be exposed to that.
Yeah.
Moving to the next picture. Before for the book, since they didn't have, I guess, horror pictures from Buchenwald, he contacted a friend of his. He'd always call Ham. This is the guy, I guess his last name was Hamilton. And he sent him a whole packet of the horror pictures and the next, and this is the envelope that they came in. They were still in the original envelope with the original postmark from like 1945. Next picture. And here's one of them. This I tried to pick the one that was maybe the least upsetting, but that's one of them. But that is Auschwitz, actually. That's not Buchenwald. Moving forward, we did donate also the flag that from his coffin, because we felt it should be with his the story. So that's in the museum also. There have been two stories in magazine, one in the newspaper, one in the magazine about this already. And Nina, maybe you want to also talk about the fact that you worked with somebody who's
Oh, yeah. After my father passed away, but prior to the time that we found all these artifacts, it was Veterans Day, and I posted that picture of him, his service picture, online, and just noted that I was so proud of him, that he had served with Patton's army, and that he, was with the troops that liberated Buchenwald. And the next morning, I got a text from a friend of mine who was a nurse, and he worked with me many years ago, some 30, 35, 40 years ago, at the hospital. And we had, kept in touch over the years. And he saw my Facebook posting, and he said, "Oh my God, Nina, your father liberated Buchenwald." He said, "I never told you this, but my father was a prisoner at Buchenwald. Your father liberated my father. He saved he said, and he went on to, he was, feeling very like emotional about it, and said, he said I wouldn't be here if it weren't for your father. He would be gone, and, we've talked about it from time to time. And, his father had some kind of artifacts also. And he recently went over to the Netherlands, because his father was Dutch. And he went over to the Netherlands, and he took the artifacts with him, and he donated them to one of the Holocaust things over there, so that they were going to be used in the same manner that these are. But he said, that his, and he shared with me that his father struggled his entire adult life with problems that stem back to his incarceration in Buchenwald, and that he himself, has had to deal with certain things that, certain difficulties that he encountered because of the difficulties that his father had. So it was really an interest, it was a far-reaching thing, that this went on.
Sure, yeah. So Maggie Rad was the one who contacted me, and she said, "Oh, these artifacts are going to be in the next exhibit." And I thought, okay, she's very nice, but they'll probably sit in a storage room forever, or for a very long time. And she wasn't kidding, because the next picture brings us to the exhibit as it is in a museum. There's the dresser. The map, it has been mounted now. It's no longer folded up to the size of something that could fit in your pocket. And there's the the flag, and that big picture in the back is the one that I showed you with my dad sitting on the top. There's on the left side there's the text to tell you what's going on and, you know, the story. So, you know, it's been quite a journey, and we really have Maggie to thank for it. You go to the next picture. This is the premiere where there was a photographer there, and there's Paul and Nina, and that's her daughter, Kristen, who's watching right now. And then the next picture is me at the same time. Next picture is again the picture of him having signed the map. The next picture, these are not original, but this would have been what was on his uniform, the T4 stripes, sergeant stripes. The next picture is, we keep mentioning the book, and the book was, you know, something that you couldn't get your hands on for a long while. And as I said, I had made copies for us, scanned every page, made it the same size so it looked the same, etc. Somebody copied it and is selling it. So it's available on Amazon if you want to go through it. And it's interesting because knowing it exists and is in your family is one thing. Having to go through it page by page by page to scan it and look at it and make sure, you know, it's scanned properly, and is like going through the journey. So we were contacted by a rabbi up in Nyack, and he had us come and speak to a group of students there. And he's the one who gave me actually this copy that he found on Amazon. And it's not a great copy. They've shrunken the pages to like half their size. But I gave him a copy of what we have, and he gave me that. So if you are interested, it's online. Also, I gave the museum all of the scans of the book. So they're in their archives, and I can't imagine why they would not share them with you. I had the book copied, but did not make it for sale because it wasn't my work, and I didn't feel right doing that. But for anyone doing research or wanting to feel like, okay, now we know this man, we've seen his life, and this is what they did. This is their whole journey. It's very, very interesting. And that is the end of our pictures and our presentation. So we can open it up to Sydney again.
Yeah, I want to thank all three of you before we move into audience questions, for presenting all of those images and for being so open about the story and for putting that all together. So I want to start by asking you about sort of your experience growing up, you know, and kind of knowing that your father had served, but not really knowing the story and kind of the sort of culture of silence around that. What was it like to kind of grow up that way? Was it hard, or was it not something you really thought about, or, you know, what was that like?
I don't think it was something, it wasn't really something that we thought about. You know, I mean, we grew up the way, you know, we grew up in a small town, Ridgefield Park, New Jersey, and we, you know, we had a very wonderful childhood. You know, we came from a close family. We had a lot of relatives around. And we just, it wasn't something that we really thought about because we didn't know, you know, it wasn't something that we knew to think about. We barely really knew that much about the Holocaust. I mean, we knew that there was a World War II, but, you know, and even as we got a little bit older, and you knew about those things, I don't think we put it together. I knew, like I said, I knew that he was there, but because he never mentioned it, because he didn't bring it up till much later in life, it wasn't really something that affected us. You guys agree, or?
Yes,
I have a little bit of a different take on it. And it includes your husband, Joe, because they went out in high school. So Nina and Joe were high school sweethearts. They got married. And I'm thinking back to barbecues that my parents used to have in the backyard on 4th of July and whatnot. And of course, all of the people their age, the men, would have been soldiers in World War II. And we would talk to them. We were interested, which is not always the case with young people, but we were interested in what their experiences were. There was one, Mr. Gizzy, he was a trombone player, and then he had a supportive family, so he started working for the post office, and he was drafted, and he played in a jazz band in the service. And as soon as he retired, he picked up the trombone again, and he started playing again. And he actually died, I believe, in a parade playing the trombone, in probably his 70s. And we were interested in these guys because they had such great stories. And so, but Dad would never tell me much of anything. And I think Nina knows much more than I did.
Paul,
Yeah.
it sounded like you had something you wanted to add.
yeah, growing up, it was just amazing. It was, not only did we have, each other and my parents, but with the way my father was, my mother was, it was like the block that we lived on was like an extended version of our family. They were so friendly that, our everybody took care of everybody else's kids. Our next door neighbor, my parents and our next door neighbors, they switched keys. They had keys to each other's house. So if any, thing ever happened one way or the other, they could help out. And to think that, as I grew up learning everything that happened in World War II, that a man could just be so giving, so loving, just blew my mind. And
Yeah,
I'm so happy to be part of it. And so proud that he was my father.
That's
mhm.
amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So to just clarify some things about your father's wartime experience, I know you mentioned that a lot of the images we saw were from Auschwitz. So was your father also at the liberation of Auschwitz, or was he only at the liberation of Buchenwald?
Only at Buchenwald, and I don't know how you do this in the middle of a war, but they were collecting the pictures and the text and everything. Like, he knew in 1945 that he needed those pictures to round out, or they all needed. If you look in the book, of course, he's not the only one who did it. He knew that they needed these pictures, and he got them from his friend Ham, because Maggie tells me that you could buy copies of those pictures, and I think there was a reason for that. From the Jewish population, they did not want it to be forgotten. They wanted people to see what happened. So how he knew that his friend had them, or they were mailed from elsewhere in the US. He mentioned Ham a lot, but we don't know much about him.
Mm.
They were close. I think they went to college together, maybe.
And then, so your father was a surgeon's assistant in the war. So after the liberation of Buchenwald, was he taking, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but was he taking care of former prisoners? Was he part of the medical team still? Like, what was his role at Buchenwald?
Yes, he was caring.
Um,
He was caring for people at Buchenwald. He was caring for the prisoners. He would tell me the story that the people were so emaciated when they got there that he said they couldn't, when you see somebody in that condition, your instinct is to feed them, and they couldn't, because they would have gotten ill. And there's my father would say that they would give them broth. And he said, and every day they would have to calculate just how much more caloric content they could have in the broth for them to tolerate it. I mean, there was a story of one of the soldiers that gave this poor prisoner a chocolate bar. And of course, the gentleman ate the chocolate bar and died because he couldn't, his system couldn't process it. And so my father would tell me that this was how emaciated these poor people were. The condition that they were in was horrible. And I think after they stayed at Buchenwald for what, like several months, right, Dan?
Yeah, I think it was 3 months he was there.
They were there, and then they moved to another
Cam.
area where people, they were where people were evacuated to, and they would
Right.
treat. So they
Those
spent
were,
quite a bit of
yeah, go
time
on.
doing that. They spent quite a bit of time caring for the prisoners.
Right, but those were American and other prisoners.
Uh-huh.
Those were the death marches as the war was going badly for the Germans and the Russians were advancing. They would get out of the death camps, but keep the prisoners, and they would march them on death marches to get them away, to keep them. And a lot of the soldiers didn't make it because they just couldn't. It was freezing. They were not dressed properly. There was, they weren't bringing a lot of food with them. And there were people who died on the road there. And I guess one of the places they went to was Cham, C-H-A-M. And that's where they set up, and they were taking care of American prisoners and others. Now, another connection to the story is my cousin from Long Island married a woman whose father was in one of those death marches, and he wrote a book that was published commercially. And he wrote 9 books actually, but he wrote this book that was published commercially. And because he was one of those soldiers, when she told me, I couldn't believe it. And I located a copy, an original copy of the book, which it turns out he had signed and given to a friend of his. Now, of course, because the age, they aged and he's no longer with us. I guess somehow that friend wound up in a nursing home and just left the book on the table in the community room for people to read. And then it got sold, and because it says at the top of the page, like, please return to, and then the name of the guy. So, and it was signed by her father. So I started to read it, and it was too difficult for me to get through. So I gave it to her because they have children, and that should be passed on to their children, that's their grandfather's experience. So I was kind of shocked that they didn't already have a copy of it, but oh well.
So another question is about what it was like for you to see your dad's objects in the museum. Like what was that experience like? And
It was
it's such
very,
yeah, I bet.
it was very emotional. First of all, seeing the dresser there, I mean, because we grew up with that dresser for their entire married life. That was their dresser. And in fact, I have a picture of myself standing in front of the dresser on the day that I got married in the gown that my mother had on. And, and you're looking at it going like, oh my, like this was a part of your everyday life. And it's changed. It's almost like it's changed its role, and now it's become something else. It's more like it's historically important because of the fact that it hid this stuff for all those years. And it was very, and to see his picture, and it was funny because when I walked in, I focused first on the dresser, that the dresser was there and whatever. And I actually walked out of the room, and then I walked back in. And when I walked back in, I looked up and I saw that big blown up picture of my father on the wall. And I went, oh my God, that's my dad,
Yeah.
it's very emotional.
Yeah, I had a similar, when I was speaking to Maggie when she originally called me on the phone, and I told her about the dresser and whatnot, and she said, is the dresser still available? And I was like, yeah, you want it? And she said, yes, we would like to have that. And that was a surprise to me, but so of course the museum doesn't send a moving truck. They send an artistic, they move art objects. And so of course they wrap this thing up like a mummy. And I was there, and like Nina said, it always lived in my parents' bedroom, and now it was the first time I'd ever seen it even in the hallway. And they were walking it down the stairs, and I was just in tears to see it go. Not that any of us needed it or was going to bring it to our house, but it was leaving, and it was the end of an era for me. And yeah, it was a shock to see it in the museum and to see the whole thing. As much as I could prepare myself mentally, know that it was going to happen, you can only prepare so much.
Yeah.
Absolutely. For it to be there, growing up with it all your life, and for it to just be a part of you, and now it's in a museum for a teaching perspective, and to keep the memories of everybody that was lost in the Holocaust means a lot, because now it can be part of everybody else's story that comes to the museum and sees everything that's there.
It's interesting. It had one job for so many years, for 62 years, and now it has another job.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So before we get to my last two questions, which I think we have time for a couple more, I do just want to share that William Zimmerman wrote in and said that his father, Morris Zimmerman, spent the last 3 months of the war as an inmate at Buchenwald, and so was also liberated by your father. And so he had the opportunity to visit Buchenwald, and yeah, just wanted to share that. That is very meaningful that you are also here with us, William. So thank you so much for writing that in. So another question that came in, has your father's experiences and learning about your father's experiences, has that given you an impetus to teach your own children about the Holocaust and about World War II more broadly?
Absolutely. Absolutely. My husband and I, again, prior to us finding all of these artifacts, at this point, I knew that my father had been at Buchenwald, and I knew some of the things. My daughters and my husband and I went to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And, of course, it's so emotional, going through there. And the four of us were like so moved. But in there's a film clip of them marching the people through Buchenwald. And I remember standing there with my daughters looking to see if we could see my father in any of the pictures. I think the thing that's the most amazing to me and to my daughters is that, you put I try to put myself in his mind, like, he was 21 years old when all of this happened. In my mind, he's always my father. So he's always senior to me. He's always somebody that I, looked up to, to keep me safe, to lead me through life, to help me, to teach me. But he was a kid when this happened. I mean, yeah, all things considered, I mean, he was so young. When I think of where I was when I was 21, and when I think of where he was when he was 21, it's so, I'm always overwhelmed by thinking of what he experienced at that age.
I would, yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Um,
it. I don't have children. Paul doesn't have children, so we can't answer. My brother has children. I'm not sure how into it they got, but this all happened after my brother passed away. So, they were there as we were cleaning out the house. My mom, unfortunately, died of COVID in 2020. She was one of those, that group. And so my nephews were with us when we were cleaning out the house, and very much part of hearing us talk about the history. So I'm sure they're aware.
Yeah.
But that's, yeah, just want to pass it along to, and by doing things like this, anything we can do. If you reach one person, then you've made progress, especially
Yeah.
nowadays politically. Yes.
Definitely. So, we kind of touched on it, but this is the question I always like to end our Story Survive programs on. What do you hope that people get from hearing your father's story? Like what is the one takeaway that you hope that they get? If nothing else, I suppose.
Perspective. That's
For me, I would think that I want people to know that it happened, that the Holocaust happened, that the atrocities were real, that he was there, that he saw them, that he was so affected by them that for the bulk of his adult life, he wouldn't or couldn't talk about them. And even when he did talk about them, it was minute, you got little snatches here and there. I think I really want people to know that it happened and it could happen again. And
I'm sure he had, yeah, I'm sorry, go on.
no, and that we have to be aware that we can't let it happen again.
And vigilant. I think, we live in such a different world now, that to think that someone that age had to go through that, is just incredible. And I don't think that he would have allowed himself to have PTSD. He had it, but it never manifested. He would never allow himself to manifest it in different ways. He just avoided it. He wasn't in a situation where he was going to be in war again by just working in New York City. He was raising a family, having, as you can see, we had good times. And so he was just able to bury it. But I think for so many of those guys, PTSD was not an option.
Well, Paul, I just want to make sure, do you have anything you wanted to add before I wrap up?
I just wanted to say that I just have to give it to their generation to have had to have gone through what they went through at such a young age. And, while it was happening, they kept it together after the war. To know how they were as adults, as fathers, you know, with their children, that they were able to stay so strong and again, not, you know, break apart with PTSD. I just find it
Mm.
a very, I give a salute to their generation and how strong they were.
Mm.
And I think
Yeah.
that in part is, I think, a good reason why we won the war. Because their generation was just so strong. And, you know, we can't let what happened there get lost in history. We have to keep it in everybody's mind. And I just want to salute everybody that had to go through that, my father included.
Mhm.
Well, I want to thank all three of you so much for being with us this evening and for sharing your father's stories and your own experiences as well. It was so moving to hear about what your father went through, and thank you so much for, as I said earlier, for being so open with us. It really means a lot. And thank you for spending the time. So I know that we're a little bit over time, so I don't want to take up too much more of your evening, but thank you again. And for everybody who joined us this evening, I also want to say thank you to you as well. If you enjoyed today's program, we hope you'll consider making a donation to support the museum at mjhnyc.org/support and joining us for our upcoming programs, which you can find at mjhnyc.org/current events. You can watch past programs and view and share today's recording, which is going to be available next week on the museum's YouTube channel. So thank you again to all three of you. Thank you again for sharing all these images and also for being a part of the museum. It really means a lot. So thank you again. Have a great night, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thanks, Sydney.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.